started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We are very happy to have a wonderful group of panelists help us delve into the issue of prevention education. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Dr. Erin Tunney. My pronouns are she and they, Director of Gender-Based Violence at Project SAFE. And I would like to welcome you. Project SAFE is a Carlow University effort that is funded by the Office of Violence Against Women and the Department of Justice. Our goals are to amplify the voices of survivors, raise awareness in the community on these issues, provide education and training for the community, provide healthy relationships and survivor support groups, and connect the community to members to resources. In this afternoon's workshops, we will hear from community organizations in the Pittsburgh area who will be sharing their best practices in gender-based violence prevention and in education. And together, we will have a discussion of strategies for overcoming obstacles, including best practices for handling disclosures of gender-based and sexual violence. I'll now hand it over to Justin Pearl, the Atkins Center Director, for a brief introduction.
All right. Thank you so much, Erin. As Erin said, my name is Justin Pearl, and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Director of the Atkins Center for Ethics here at Carlow University. The Atkins Center for Ethics was founded in 2017 through a generous endowment by Michelle and Dr. Pat Atkins. The Atkins Center is committed to bringing ethical reflection to bear on important social issues through teaching, community engagement, and scholarship. Furthermore, it is designed to raise awareness about the importance, complexity, and consequences of incorporating ethics in all that we do throughout our lives and careers. Additionally, I would like to recognize the Kenneth D. Hines Endowment for Ethics in the Professions, which is also supporting today's program. Now, before we begin, I have just a few logistical notes about today's program. First, as you probably heard a couple moments ago, we are going to be recording this program, so please keep that in mind if you choose to unmute yourself and ask questions. Please, speaking of muting, please kindly keep yourselves muted when you're not speaking so that we can be sure to hear the panelists speaking clearly. We will have roughly 40 minutes of panel discussion and 40 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question for the Q&A, you can either submit it in the general chat by sending a message there. We might not be able to get to everyone, but we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible in today's event. Additionally, if you'd like to speak the question yourself, you can use the raise hand feature, and we would love to hear your voices during today's program as well. You are also welcome to share resources or helpful links that you think other people who are in the workshop might find useful by posting those in the chat. And we just ask that you use discretion and good judgment when you're making those posts. If you'd like to stay connected after today's program, you can find Project SAFE on Instagram at Carlow SAFE and the Atkins Center at Atkins Center. So without further ado, let me pass the mic back to Erin for a brief introduction of our panelists.
Thanks, Justin. Because my internet is a bit, I'm going to keep my camera turned off in hopes that I don't freeze on you. So first, I would like to introduce Will McGinnis for Pittsburgh Action Against Rape, or PAR, with over 18 years of experience in education and training in both the formal and the community. He has continuously sought to create a safer space in the Pittsburgh area in his prevention efforts for PAR, with the goal of reducing gender-based violence in all areas of life. Currently, his team of educators implements programs in K-12 schools, universities, and leads a variety of trainings to the Pittsburgh area's for-profit and nonprofit businesses. His hope is that through skills-based learning and prevention efforts, people will grow in their awareness of sexual violence and develop skills to safely intervene and make the world a safer place. Next, we have Rhonda Fleming. Rhonda Fleming is the Chief of Prevention, Intervention, and Outreach at the Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh, and my former boss. Women's Center and Shelter is one of the oldest domestic violence shelters for women and their children. She has served in multiple prevention roles since her employment with the organization, and with a recent promotion, she now manages the residential programs, wellness, and non-residential services. Women's Center and Shelter provides teen dating violence prevention and intervention services using the award-winning curriculum, Hands Are Not for Hurting. As co-author of this pre-kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum, Rhonda has played a major role in the implementation throughout the states of Pennsylvania, Arkansas, Michigan, and South Carolina. She has also trained teachers, counselors, advocates, and other professionals in Moscow, Russia on teen dating violence prevention. They have now replicated sections of the Hands Are Not for Hurting curriculum. One of Rhonda's current passions for her work includes the facilitation of weekly groups with men on the effects of battering and abuse. Under her leadership and direction, MENS, which is Men Embracing Nonviolence and Safety, was the first Allegheny County Batterers Intervention Program to receive full certification by Allegheny County Department of Human Services. Rhonda provides training to the professional community on the identification and intervention of intimate partner violence, teen dating violence, dynamics of abuse, power, and control. She has made numerous television and radio appearances, including local and national programming. Rhonda's career awards include the Governor's Victim Services Awards, the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Service Award, and the New Pittsburgh-Courier 2016 Women of Excellence, and several other recognitions. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Administration of Justice at the University of Pittsburgh and a Master's of Science in Organizational Leadership at Geneva College. Anitra Branch is Community Health Manager at Allies for Health Plus and Wellbeing, an organization that provides primary health care, outreach testing for sexually transmitted infections, and case management for people living with HIV. Anitra has worked for Allies for over 10 years in a variety of roles. Allies offering HIV education to women in their homes or at community services, then worked as a case manager for about 6 years. She services and coordinating volunteers. She now supervises and works alongside offer at Allies and other locations throughout Allegheny County. We are very pleased to note that Allies for Health and Wellbeing provides testing once a month at Carlow University now, and the next testing date will be on October 11th. Brett Adams is a prevention educator with Crisis Center North, a nonprofit counseling and resource center that provides services to victims of domestic violence and their loved ones in northern and western Allegheny County via counseling, therapy, case management, legal and medical advocacy, and economic empowerment services. In addition, the center provides community trainings on topics related to intimate partner violence and teen dating violence, as well as prevention education programming to local schools. As a prevention educator, he goes into middle schools and discusses topics relating to developing healthy relationships and how to respect ourselves and others. He is a PA certified teacher with experience in teaching disadvantaged youth and has extensive training in trauma-informed care. The goal at Crisis Center North is to end the cycle of violence by empowering victims of abuse. Thank you all for coming. And we're so grateful to have all 4 of you panelists with us. So we're going to start with Will today. And ask Will, what is prevention education?
Okay, well, first off, thank everybody for being here. It's nice to sort of be among sort of giants and people and all you here as well. So I think prevention education is something that the word gets thrown out a lot, but I think it does take some work to actually understand what we mean by it. So in order to really think about prevention, I think first we have to think about awareness. I think often in the field of violence work or violence prevention work, I think most people lead in thinking about thinking about awareness, the idea that if we just let people know that problems exist, if we just let people know that sexual violence exists, gender-based violence exists, dating, domestic violence exists, that will be enough to empower people and end violence. But after years and years of working, we recognize that that isn't true. Just telling people that things exist with statistics and fear tactics isn't enough to really shift any sort of movement. Instead, we have to think about prevention from a CDC primary prevention kind of way, that we have to start to look at violence as a series of behaviors that occur, and that in order to end it, we have to interrupt those behaviors before they happen. Often this means that so when we're talking about prevention, and especially primary prevention, we're often talking about promoting factors that are associated with healthy relationships, and counteracting factors that are associated with perpetration of sexual violence and domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Now, when we say prevention, I also think that we have to lead with two things. We have to lead with first proactive prevention, and sort of, I'm going to call it intervention prevention, which isn't a real thing, but it's the idea that that we have to have solution-focused behaviors that teach skills to children and adults, that we lead by not only having people learn how to recognize violence, how to safely intervene violence, but we also have to put forth proactive behaviors that start to shift norms, that starts to say in the world that this isn't good, or this isn't appropriate, or this isn't normal. Because to be honest, one of the, I think the most dangerous and problems that allow for violence to continue is a normalization of violence and violence-seeking behaviors. So the idea that if we just normalize this as something that happens, then we're losing the game already. So really, by pushing forth proactive skill-based learning, as well as proactive statements and messages that change norms, is really what prevention education to me is. And I'll throw it over to my colleagues as well.
Thank you so much, Will. We'll go next to Rhonda, and then Brett, both from domestic violence organizations, and then we'll get Anitra's perspective from Allies for Health and Wellbeing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And Dr. Tunney, thank you so much for that long introduction. I'm gonna have to send a shorter one, but I thank you so much for patiently reading all that. You know, I'm gonna pick up right from where Will left off, and then I'm gonna add something practical that might not seem like it's related, but I'm gonna show you in just a minute how it is related. Will was just finishing up, we're talking about proactive intervention, being proactive about prevention. And we know that's very true. Last night, somewhere around 8:30 p.m., I start coughing. And I know my own body. I know when I cough, it's just like or it's a cough. And then I coughed all through the night, so now I'm taking Mucinex, right? Because I was thinking, oh, I wish I had taken emergency before I flew and traveled and went to a concert with thousands of people. I wish I was being more proactive and taking vitamin C and echinacea and hot tea and honey, but I wasn't really proactive in doing that. But I know that is the route to one route way, not the, but at least one route way to help prevent getting colds and flus and things like that. I'm not speaking of flu into my life, but I certainly might be fighting a cold today. Had I been more proactive in taking my vitamin C prior to this, I might not have this. So I think when we look at prevention education, I think about it primarily as something we already know about. As Will said, it's not something that we want to just make people aware. We know about statistics for domestic violence, intimate partner, and teen dating violence. We know about the statistics. We know about warning signs. We know all of those potential the potentiality for that leading into being an abusive or controlling relationship. We know all that. So how do we begin to teach people to look out for, to know what not to do, or how best to prevent getting into an abusive relationship, so that we're not then doing I think you called it proactive intervention. And I know just what you mean by that, and I understand it's not a real thing, but it's something we really do. So I certainly agree. But I think prevention education definitely includes being aware, being knowledgeable, and knowing how to teach the root of what is prevention education, getting to the root causes. So I say I'll limit mine, or specify mine, to saying in domestic violence, we know one root cause of intimate partner violence continue is the intergenerational cycle of violence. So beginning to teach children at a very young age. And as Dr. Tunney mentioned, Hands Are Not for Hurting is a pre-K through 12th grade curriculum. And you would think, well, what do you say with preschool or a 4-year-old about domestic violence? You obviously, for prevention, don't have to use the words domestic violence, intimate partner violence, or family violence. But if you really want to teach about it, you begin to teach ways that prevent that type of entitled thinking. So for instance, well, I'll say this and I'm going to pass it on. For instance, one lesson we have that we use with preschoolers is making a paper cutout of a teddy bear, and you divide them into groups. One group has the head, another the body, 2 legs, 2 arms, and you divide them, and you have the children look at how they put that teddy bear together, that paper teddy bear together. And it's talking about sharing space. It's talking about understanding, respect, and values. And you don't have to use those grown-up words with 4-year-olds. But I do think prevention education is something that really needs to start for intimate partner violence, needs to start at a younger age, so that we're interrupting the cycle of intergenerational violence. So thank you. And I'm going to take a sip of water. I don't have any vitamin C right now, but I'm going to take a sip of water with that. Thank you. And I think I'm passing it back to Dr.
Brett?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here with you, because I'm very new to prevention education. And Rhonda, when she was listing off all your accomplishments, I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I've been in this position less than a year. And so I'm constantly asking myself, what is prevention education? And so I constantly go back to that word prevention and what can we do? And I try to look at the root causes of why do people want this power and control over someone else? What happens? Kids that I taught in the charter school that it was a high school aged kids that they saw intergenerational violence all the time, and that was their norm, and it was retaliation. And so I'm with middle school kids at this point, and so I'm trying to understand from a trauma informed side of things that I learned about teaching at a charter school is sometimes these behaviors are not understood, and we don't understand the root causes. And so when I'm talking to younger kids, we talk a lot about self-awareness, how to have what is self-esteem, how to have self-respect, respect for others, and being aware of your emotions and understanding where they come from and what you can and cannot control, and how to handle that. And so for me, prevention education becomes really focusing on the self and understanding the strength that we all have as individuals, and trying to, again, avoid making decisions and being aware of situations that might lead to harmful relationships. And with younger kids, like you said, 5th graders, I'm not really talking about domestic violence. I'm trying to teach communication, positive communication skills, and developing relationships, and healthy relationships. And we have very honest discussions about how difficult it is to be a teenager and a child today, with all the different stressors that our parents have and that we have on ourselves. And so just trying to prepare people for situations that arise that are challenging, is sort of how I look at it.
Thank you, Brett. Anitra, what does prevention education look like in your field?
Hi everyone, and I'm with you there, Brett. It's really an honor to be here with everybody. And I will say a lot of my work, certainly in recent years, has focused on, because I work in sexual health, the prevention of sexually transmitted infections. And as a part of that, we do have folks who come in who have been raped, who've been victims of sexual assault. So that's a regular part of our conversation. Education is proactive, right? Just in general, education is a means to prevent harm, to increase awareness, to increase knowledge. So a lot of the discussion that we engage in is really around consent. So that's what prevention education looks like at Allies, how to engage people in that conversation and establish for themselves what that means and their rights as it regards to consent.
Thank you so much. Will, did you raise your hand?
I did. I just wanted to say one more thing, which I think one of the things that Brett and, was, he reminded me of in ways like often education isn't something that by nature, education doesn't seek to take away, right? The idea that you can't remove people's behaviors and not provide them with an alternative healthy one. So just saying things like don't have sex and, wait until you're 18 to date, things like that aren't productive. And they're also not productive when you start to think about other coping skills or other skills that people might have that have, that they have for their own safety, that they think that provide safety for them. And we can't just like when we think about trauma informed, it's not like a deficiency. We can't take things away without replacing something, replacing with a positive skill that they can actually use and instead. So I just, when we think about prevention education, we just have to be really careful that we're not just saying things like don't, or stop, but are actually providing something with an alternative way that is either a healthier way or that actually allows for them to meet their needs still in many ways.
So thank you, Will. Now, so next we are going to ask what does your organization do to prevent gender-based violence? And I think a lot of you have touched upon that. And if each of you could maybe take another example and go into a little bit more depth of what you might do to, in a prevention lesson, then that would be really helpful for us when we're looking at what this would look like for educators. We'll start with Rhonda. We're not going to start with Rhonda. There is an emergency at the shelter, and so she will be right back. Okay, so Brett, can we start with you? You were talking about your work with middle schoolers, and I wonder if you can give us some further examples.
Yeah, you don't want to scare them. So one of the main themes is optimistic bias, and we talk about how people think nothing bad will ever happen to them and how that can be a dangerous thought, and how that it's important to protect yourselves and be prepared for situations that might go wrong. And so especially with the fifth graders, they're starting to form friendships. Maybe 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, those friendships starts to change. And so we talk about communication and how to understand different ways we communicate and how important it is to be seen and to listen and to really understand what someone is saying and try to offer them an empathetic ear, and not always fix a problem and turn to advising somebody who doesn't ask for it. And so empathy, discussion of empathy, I use a Brene Brown video that is fantastic for all the ages. She explains it really well, and the kids really understand, okay, I don't want to judge what the person is saying to me or doing. I want to be there and be empathetic. And then I hope that translates to, I'm not going to do something to somebody that I wouldn't want done to me. And so we focus a lot on that, and we try to have a fun time. We play charades is one of the things that we do. It's feeling emotion charades, and kids try to guess what emotion they're acting out. And the kids have a fun time with that. And so, we never really talk about preventing it specifically, but we talk about just being prepared, and not treating people differently based on anything.
So if we're understanding domestic violence as rooted in the desire to have power and control over another individual, then the building of empathy and that, understanding emotions and self-awareness is kind of some of those steps to help to counteract that desire to control other people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Anitra, I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about what your consent education might look like.
Well, I was thinking about how we, basically at Allies, we try to create safe spaces for people to be with peers. A community we focus greatly on is the lesbian, gay, trans, queer, bisexual community. So to create spaces for people to interact, people who are HIV positive, creating spaces where you share something meaningful with someone, and have that freedom of communication to talk about your experiences with regard to sex. We also sponsor groups that hold events for youth and the ball community, to try and encourage those spaces for safe communication and just feeling safe with people around you. In our testing setting and in our clinic setting, our providers are all trained to engage in conversations around safer sex practices, but also consent. And it's really just having those one-on-one interactions with people and making the most of them, ensuring that they feel comfortable with us in that space and giving an opportunity for them to share.
Thank you so much. Just a follow-up question to that. Do you use like the Fry's model of consent that is that Planned Parenthood kind of began to utilize? I know Will can tell us what each of the Fry's model indicates, but I am just wondering if your consent education kind of like it differs at all from if there are particular unique things about the way that you discuss consent education.
We don't have a particular model, though. Like I'm like, okay, that's something we should look up. I'm glad you called Will out on that. But no, we don't follow that model.
Okay. Thank you. And Will.
Yeah, so I mean, at PAR, we do a lot of different type of, I guess, classroom experiences and trainings to think about prevention of specifically gender-based, but mostly really sexual violence as well. So if we think about consent from really a standpoint of just a sexual experience, and I think we often lose a lot of children who might not be there and not be having that experience in the moment, or might not even have relationships, or might think those are kind of yucky still. So like we really, I think when we think about consent, we think about it from a really from a space where People have ownership of their own boundaries, and people, sort of the idea that no means no, yes means yes, I think as a basis is valuable, but I also think we lose something when we just keep it to that. One example I use with children a lot of times, I know when I was growing up, and I'm pretty sure it still happens now, is that experience around a lunchroom table where you were dared to do something, eat some sort of really gross food, and maybe ketchup and chocolate milk or something really disgusting that occurs, and the sort of tension experience of somebody who is sort of manipulated and pressured into saying yes. And really that conversation starts to evolve into, was that really a consensual conversation, even though you said yes? And we start to break it down slowly and start to think about like, what does manipulation and power mean in spaces? Because just saying no means no and yes means yes, I think really does our children, and especially at the university level, to service, because as they exit out, they think that's real. And they think just because they heard a yes or didn't hear a no, that was a consensual relationship experience. And the next day, somebody feels completely different than the other person. So I think being really open and honest with children about how the world is not black and white, it's not yes and no. It is really, there's these sort of gradations of consent and boundaries is really critical. Kids are smart, they'll get it. I think that's really critical. And I also think one of the things that we talk about often, though we don't say these words in spaces, is really being a bystander intervention. What does it mean to challenge friends, especially challenge our friend group and our peers in spaces? I think most people say that they'll jump up and help everybody in the world. But the reality is, whenever we have that social pressure that holds us back, that it often stops us from intervening. So what does it really mean to have that pressure? And what does it really mean to sort of combat that as children, as even adults, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. You could be out with your current colleagues and the experience happens as well. And I think one of the best ways, when I think about we forget, and what I think is really valuable that you're here today, is that children aren't the only ones who need this education. As you know, I'm a certified English and history teacher, and I taught English for many years before I abandoned the public school system and worked in nonprofit. But one thing I think is real is that our educators don't get that education as well. They don't understand their role in a bystander, their role in supporting children who disclose, who they see catcalling in the hallway, all these things. That's still a skill that educators have to learn, and is in an appropriate way. So, one of the things I think we also do is provide that education in the world, is provide that education to teachers and instructors, much like I know Women's Center Shelter does, as well as I'm sure Crisis Center North and Allies for Health. The idea that it starts with adults. We often put, although I think it's really important to put roles and responsibilities on children, there's often spaces where they don't have the power to make decisions, and they don't have the power to even establish their boundaries. So really providing the adults in the room with that education is critical as well. And knowing that they have responsibility for that is something that I think is integral to prevention education and the work we do.
Thank you. And Rhonda is back. So I am just wondering if you can go into a bit more detail about what your organization does to prevent gender-based violence. Maybe talk a little bit more about how Hands Are Not for Hurting might look in each age group, for instance.
Thank you so much, you all. Thank you for understanding that really was an emergency at shelter just now. So I just was hearing Will say at the end of that teaching the adults is very important also. Hands Are Not for Hurting, when we wrote Hands Are Not for Hurting, we started the program with doing Dangerous Choices, which is our high school teen dating violence program. And actually, that was even before we named the curriculum Hands Are Not for Hurting. We were already doing prevention work with the hospitals. And really, that's what led us to do more lower grades, is because we found out that we were actually doing intervention well, not prevention. So we were doing intervention work because we had ninth graders at that time, 10th graders already involved in abusive relationships. So we decided, well, we need to go to lower grades. And that's when we started with the 4th and 5th grade. And without going through all of it, we obviously, as already has been said, have pre-K through 12th grade. And what we did in the elementary schools was involve bringing parents in. And it was really interesting to watch the audience sometimes when you did parent education and awareness around intimate partner violence, and talking about the statistics, because this may have been the baseline for them to have it in an educational way, not necessarily in an experimental way, unfortunately, but talking to parents about intimate partner violence and about places to go and to get help, and about the impact of intimate partner violence on children, and just watching some parents, honestly, watch some parents leave the program early, see some of the eyes and stares that they were giving you, and you can't make any conclusions. You can't say, well, that means they haven't abused it. You can just say it was difficult for a lot of parents for various reasons to sit and hear and have that information. But I think that is critical to be able to reach out to the masses when we're doing gender-based violence work. And that's one of the things we attempt to do at Women's Center Shelter for every way that we can. So I would say including the prevention side and doing school educations, as Brett here has talked, I'm sorry, you may have talked about it while I was off the screen for a while, but I know Crisis Center North does it also. So I know doing the different prevention programs in schools is extremely important for gender-based violence. And that's something that I want to make sure I get a chance to say. There's so many curricula out here on gender-based violence. And I bet you a lot of us right here could each write a chapter, our own version, or at least one lesson that we want to implement on gender-based violence, right? We really could do that. But I'm gonna tell you the honest truth. It is the knowledge and compassion and desire of your presenters and facilitators to really do this work, because it's difficult work. So to really teach and be able to actually reach children, to reach adults, to reach teachers, because we certainly have had teachers need to pull us aside. I bet you've had that, but I'm sure others that do school programs, you've had people who need to pull you aside and say, well, can I talk to you for a minute? And they have their own story that they need to share, that they need to disclose. And sometimes they never have the opportunity to share that. I mean, I've certainly had that happen when when I was more actively doing school programs, where a teacher would need to talk and say, well, when I was growing up, and then they kind of make light of it, right? But I think with doing gender-based violence work, we have to have knowledgeable, compassionate staff, facilitators, counselors, whatever word we want to use, specialists, whatever word term we use, people who really believe in what they're teaching and being prepared to teach any grade level in adults as well, to help with true prevention. And that's one of the things we believe in doing at Women's Center Shelter. Our hotline is a 24-hour hotline. We have a text and chat line, and that is for anyone. And when we do presentations in schools and or in anywhere, professional presentations, we always say this hotline number is also for you. It doesn't have to be, it is not only for victims of intimate partner violence, but it may be you're working with a family, or you are in this program and you are triggered by something that you're now remembering. And because prevention education, I would say, I don't know, it's not in its infancy anymore, but honestly, when you think about the lack of funding sometimes to really fund prevention education, it still is not where it needs to be. So all that said, I would say our agency does everything we can, including that 24-hour hotline, that text and chat line, for people to be able to call in, get information, find out how they can get help, or just to be able to talk to somebody and to sometimes just get it off their chest. So that's the way. The other way I do want to mention is we also have what's called typically nationally, internationally, it's called Battery Intervention Program. And it's in my bio, we named ours MENS, the acronym MENS, Men Embracing Nonviolence and Safety. For many years, and as Dr. Tunney said, we worked together. And when I first started working at Women's Center Shelter, I thought, like, how do we think we're going to really cure this problem, help alleviate this problem, when we believe this problem is largely perpetrated by men against women? Put a time out and put a pin in that. We know intimate partner violence happens in the TLGBTQ plus community. We know it happens in women being abused toward men. It happens in all relationships. We know that. We also know that in our society, it's a crime largely perpetrated against women, right? Well, why aren't we then working with men? I could not understand that for the life of me. So I started at Women's Center. I have no shame in saying how long I've been here. I started in 1990. It was in 2007 that we decided to start working with men who use intimate partner violence, men who use power and control in their relationships. And now we do have our battering intervention program. So we try to do it from all ages and all facets at Women's Center Shelter. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. I would like to just start with Anitra and ask about what obstacles you experience in doing this work, and how do you and what do you do to try to overcome those obstacles?
The greatest obstacle that we've faced is discomfort among school administrators, and perceived discomfort by schools of parents. I haven't directly encountered that because I don't have that direct line to parents so much, but yeah, that's the concern, that we're talking about things that make people uncomfortable. We're talking about children and sex, we're talking about children and violence. And people oftentimes like to turn a blind eye to that. They want to, preserve the innocence of children by not exposing them to this information, but they're already being exposed. And doing this kind of relates to another question of like the power of like prevention education, is that if you're providing a narrative that comes from a space of like education and understanding and like expertise and supporting people, rather than like creating, rather than encouraging violence, rather than like kids kind of figuring it out for themselves and like creating negative habits or thoughts around these things. So that's been the biggest issue. I will say that what's worked for us is finding individual teachers who are really about what we're doing. Oftentimes it's like those educators reaching out to us directly, and they may say, okay, so when we go in the school, we need to be really quiet about what we're doing here. I remember going to Washington and Jefferson University, is that where it was? It's like in Waynesburg. And we were invited to do a presentation on like safer sex, condom use, and it happened like adjacent to the dining hall. And we had to do so in a way that was like kind of veiled and like timed such that school administrators would likely be finished. Like they ate lunch at a certain table. It was like so much coordination around like protecting this experience for the students. But the nursing staff there, the clinic, the school clinic staff were just really dedicated to this education. And so we made it happen. So it's finding, building those alliances and operating within the systems in a way that they will allow. So Dr. Tiny, like Carlo, for one, Carlo Duquesne, we're not allowed to have condoms out. I don't think that we're encouraged to bring them at all, but like, so we respect that. We are there to offer a service, we're there to offer education, and we let people know where they can get those materials if they want to, where they can access certain resources that the school may not want us to advertise.
Thank you. Brett, what obstacles do you encounter?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Anitra, it's school boards, it's administration. A lot of scared adults who think their children are really ignorant to what's happening in the world, and don't understand that they have access to the world in the palm of their hands. The kids come up, we don't talk about anything really controversial, but when we talk about gender and we talk about respecting each other and stereotypes, the kids bring up, I say, how is it changing now? And the kids say the pronouns are changing. And we go, great, great example. And so one kid hears that, they go home, tell their mom on the school board, and mom's upset that we're pushing some agenda, some liberal agenda. And we're like, the kids already know about this stuff. We got to have honest conversations. And then they pull us from their school. The principal says, I believe in what you're doing, but the school board, I could still lose my job. And so that becomes our obstacle. And the kids are not getting the content that I am very passionate about and feel is very important. And it's that respect and equality. And so I go back and I look at what the obstacle is. And I think, am I presenting prevention education? Is my goal being met by these discussions that we're having? And if they still are, then I push through that, and I'm going to go find other partners to work with who appreciate it. And I sort of try to focus on the strengths of the program and the integrity of what we're doing to push through that. And just really, you manage your own emotions, because I can get pretty upset and fired up whenever these things are happening with these parents who don't believe that their kids know anything. That's the biggest obstacle.
Thanks so much, Brett. Will, what are the biggest obstacles you encounter?
I think very similar. I don't think I have anything else to add really in that, but I will say something, that one thing is true, and something Rhonda started talking about, and is really the importance of compassionate, caring, involved and engaged adults in children's life. When we think about it, parents aren't always doing that. So really, as teachers, I think you can be empowered to be those people, right? To be those people who, and you can really actively remove obstacles as a teacher, for not only for the children, but also for those parents. And something Anitra said too, the idea of like education by itself is, I think, a starting base. Like sometimes we have to go slow for when we're thinking about these obstacles. But I think for the most part, like very similar. Like we don't have like it's often people who are, our name has rape in it, right? And one of the reasons we choose to use the word PAR instead of Pittsburgh Action Against Rape is because of that. I've been on meetings with parents, and there was an active translator there, and they asked me to keep it PG rated because of, and I was like, I'm here to talk about sex. I don't know what I'm like I don't know what to say to you. We're literally talking about sexual abuse, but none of it's R-rated, I promise you. So I think people's misunderstanding and ignorance and fear is really a barrier.
Thank you. Rhonda, you mentioned funding before. Is that one of the obstacles that you encounter? And also, just are there any additional obstacles that you would like to add?
So definitely, we know nonprofit funding is definitely an obstacle, particularly for doing long-term work. It would be so ideal to be able to blanket a whole school district together, and I say that together, but as in, if Brett is working in the North Hills, we're working in the Pittsburgh Public School. If PAR is working in Propel Schools, Brett and I need to meet. We need to talk about it, because see, these kids travel from different neighborhoods. So we need to talk about together what we're doing. I think that's another obstacle that we also need to continue to address, is like the walls between us, and I don't mean just Brett, Will, not that, I just mean overall in our local area. I think that's another barrier that we have to address, is like that territorial thing. It's like, no, we have people out here who need this, right? So if they called and they asked and you try to give it to somebody else and that agency or organization can't do it, then go do it, get the work done. Let's get rid of those kind of barriers. And I have to share a story, because when something gets heavy on me, I'm like, well, it must be meant to be told for a reason. And I'll be honest and tell you, I've never ever told this story in a setting like this. All right, so bear with me as I even share this. I think it makes sense right now when we're talking about barriers, and we're talking, as Anitra said, we're talking about, I think everyone said, we're talking about school boards and parents, and that being a big barrier. So we were doing a school program. Let me set this up. Let me say this when I tell the end of the story. Of course, I'm not going to say a name. If you figure out who I'm talking about, just keep it to yourself. Also, don't all of a sudden put a name in the chat room. So Pittsburgh's that small that you might figure it out. But I'm just going to say it was years ago. And we were doing our school teen dating violence prevention program. And as Dr. Sunny may remember, we did our high school program in a team approach. We sent a male facilitator, a female facilitator. We divided the students by gender at that time, male, female. And that is at that time how we identified and separated students, right? So this was an all male class, this is all male students, male teacher, and our male facilitator. Now, would our staff ever go in and write something that we figured to be inappropriate on the board? Of course not, right? But I'm not even gonna say the word, we'll say it begins with a P, has a double consonant, and ends with a Y. So the students put that word out there. We were making a list on the board, and the student used that word. So that word went on the board. Now, of course, it's going to become a part of the conversation and talked about how women are often, there's often condescending language used about women. This is where this lesson is going to go to, right? Well, the principal of that school at that time walked down the hall, saw the word on the board, got irate, kicked us out of school. We weren't allowed to come back for a few years, right? This is a barrier. When we have people in schools that think I'm protecting you by not allowing you to do the work that's actually needed. You know, because if kids I don't care, there's things we would never say to a 6-year-old that a 6-year-old will say to us. We had a 6-year-old, and we had a first grader say to us out loud in class, my daddy touched me in my private parts, and then he went to jail. Him and my mom aren't together anymore. This is out loud in the first grade classroom, right? Fortunately, we had a team approach. So actually, while my co-facilitator kept teaching, I eased over to the teacher and said, is this new news? And the teacher was able to say, no, the whole class knows about it. It's been open already. Oh, okay. That child was looking for help and support. To break down barriers and walls, we have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to go there. I think Brett said that, or Anita was saying, we have to be willing to go where the kids are, because it was Will, but whoever, they already know. We're not going in and telling kids things that was Brett who said that. We're not going in and telling kids things they don't know about. They know pronouns have changed, and some of them are curious because they don't understand why, and others know why and can explain it, and we need that. Now, the irony of that story I told, right? This is the part I've never said in a setting like this. That same principal later in life was allegedly arrested for being involved in a prostitution ring. I'm like, oh, and you don't want us teaching kids. I'm saying that's irony, and that's also barrier. Let's break down the barriers and do the work we need to do.
Anitra, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate Rhonda's point of communication, and that's what I think is so often lacking. Whenever people do feel that discomfort, to directly address it. Whenever that 6-year-old said what they said in the class, like talking to the teacher in that moment. If that principal, instead of seeing that word on the board, engaged in a conversation, there could have been more education, there could have been more opportunity for growth in that moment, instead of just shutting it down and then those kids not getting to benefit from the experience.
Thank you, Anitra. Will, I'm going to let you speak, and then we're going to, now Brett wants to speak too. This is wonderful. While we are, while they're about to speak, I just want to let people know that we're about to open up the floor for questions. So please feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we will call on you. Okay, Will.
Yeah, I just want to say another barrier, which I think is real, is, Rhonda mentioned funding as money. And, I think another barrier that we think about, like, what is valuable, and one of the things is time as well. We think about how much time we have in front of children as providers having this conversation. It's often really limited. And I think some of those are really good, really real and good reasons around, like, making sure children have math skills and reading skills. That's really valuable. But one of the things that I think is an ongoing barrier is the belief that coming in for a 1.5 hour conversation is going to provide skills, change somebody's lives, and we might be able to provide a little bit of information for them, but not really. So I think a big barrier is really school districts. I think often restrictions, either real or imposed from themselves or us, is that this work can't be done in a 20-minute auditorium. It just can't. So knowing that is really critical as well. And I think the education system by default is broken in some ways in allowing like real pro-social deeper learning around how to be a human as well. So that's all.
Thank you, Will. Brett?
No, I agree. Oh, did I mute myself? No. Rhonda, when you brought up the 6-year-old who said that in front of the class, like that one moment is more teachable than anything any one of us can do up there and say. Having a peer share a story like that really hits it home for the other kids. And so I'm hoping to, when I'm in a classroom, I see eyes on me, people are engaged and listening to me and responding. And I'm hoping that they get the understanding that whatever happens, something's happening to them at home, it's not their fault. And it can happen to anyone here and you really would have no idea. But like, that's an amazing story of where I think a peer could make a lot of difference in a room. And I don't know how you don't really get that out of a classroom if you're talking to them, someone share your story, please. That's not going to happen every time, but thanks for sharing that. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I would like to open up the floor for questions. So does anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question, or we'll also read questions that are written in the chat. Just give people a minute. And if there aren't questions, I have more, but I just want to make sure we have an opportunity for people to ask questions that are most important for them. Frankie?
Hi, I was just wondering if we'll have like resources available like after this, like when the session closes, like some of your resources for like women's shelters and families that some of us might come in contact with that are victims of domestic abuse.
I would say if everybody could put their website in the chat, and then also KJ, if you could put my email in the chat too. We have Carlo Project Safe has a Schoology page that has a list has different resource lists. We have resource lists that are LGBTQ specific. We have, sexual assault, domestic violence, health, wellness. So you can definitely come to us for resources. Do any of the panelists have anything that they would like to add in terms of resources that they recommend? And one thing I'm wondering too is if Brett is able to put the link to the Brene Brown video. If you happen to have it, that would be great. But does anybody else have on the panel have recommendations for resources?
I put our website in there, and I think that's the best way because in addition to getting the contact information, you can just get information. Excuse me, you can just find information on our website, as I'm sure that's true for all of us. You can find information on our website as well as get the 24-hour hotline numbers as well. So I would definitely say start with reading the website and also having that hotline number or all of them having the hotline numbers available as well.
Thank you. Another question. Oh, go ahead, Will.
I'm just saying, also be aware, there's a lot of, like, we are really local experts, but like this work is done throughout the country. And if you don't find something on our website, you could always go to there's state organizations that sort of help. I know for us, for sexual violence, is Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, or PCAR. There's the domestic, Rhonda, what's it called? I lost it all of a sudden. PCADV, thank you very much. PCADV, there's RAIN, RAINN. There's a lot of different agencies out there, Future Without Violence, that is really important to think about. So if you don't find it on one of our websites, there's plenty of resources out there. Just Google away.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question in the chat. Well, it says, this isn't a question, but also an input I learned from you guys. One thing I didn't know is how throughout the prevention organizations, you faced obstacles with some school administrations from just teaching a topic that really needs to be heard. But I love the fact that you continue to teach not only children, but all ages, of being aware of what to look out and to prevent situations. Okay.
I want to begin by saying thank you for that comment. And I so agree. We went for funding 3 years ago. And we went around to Pittsburgh schools and asked for MOU, memorandum of understanding, which doesn't say you have to have the program. It says, you support the program. We had a school fill out the MOU for us and had us come in the first year, and then didn't have us come back. And I know nothing inappropriate happened with our staff. They just decided not to move forward with the next step of the program. And I don't know. It baffles me. I have to be honest. We had a school reach out to us last year. Their 8th graders was, listen to this. Their 8th graders was misusing the word rape. So if an 8th grader, if they were, well, I may have shared this with you before this example, but teachers were overhear kids in the hall talking. So if an 8th grader was talking to a 7th grader, they'd be like, oh, he raped her. The same thing, or vice versa, girl talks to a boy, oh, she raped him. And they was just misusing the word rape as if it was okay. And that really hurt me, for the fact that they didn't know which of these kids obviously had been sexually abused. First of all, kids don't know how to, they don't think like that they could be standing up about somebody who actually had been raped, who was living with sexual abuse at home. They didn't know this, right? So we had like my whole department, the education department. And it's kind of small, Aaron. It's not like it used to be when you were there, but it's small. But we were all on the call together. I was there, great input. We were definitely willing. And the school, we had 2 meetings. The first person who was interested, and then that person brought on the other 2 counselors. So for each grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So we were all on the call together. And then they had to take it to the administrators. We never got back. We called back. We asked to go back. And we called several times, emailed, and they never responded again. And it's like, well, what happened? I mean, why did you decide to not have somebody come in? And I'll never say it has to be just women's in the shelter. If they had decided at that point they wanted PAR, I'd have been like, please call PAR. I mean, that's fine. Get the help for the students, for the kids. Don't let somebody go and not know that, Anitra, I really respect the work that your organization does. Like, how can we help prevent another future of STDs that are preventable if we don't begin to talk about them with kids? Children, I'm gonna call them children, that's a sign of my age, but children having babies at 13 and 14 was thinking about sex at 10 and 11. You don't start having sex at 12 if you haven't already been thinking about it. We need to be able to teach in younger grades without anything offensive, because I'm sure any of us on this screen, Brett, or Anitra, Will, I'm speaking for all of us, I bet we would welcome a parent. I know we would. A parent can sit in on our lesson. You can come sit in on our lesson. You can see everybody's nodding their head. We're not teaching anything to your children that we can't say to you, the parents. So it's fine if you're there together. We would start a parents group, we would do something if you really need, if parents want a group, or how do I talk to my child about this? My child is 10, 12, 14, whatever age. How do I talk about my child who is mainstream in school, but they are on the spectrum? How do I help my child get protection? There's ways we could do it if they open up the doors for us. So thank you for your comment. That was very.
Another question that I have is, how can we ensure that prevention education is inclusive and is, and really helps, is appropriate for, is tailored for diverse audiences? Who would like to start with that one?
I can start. I think one of the most important things is to do the work on yourself. So identify for yourself what your comfort level is. If you aren't comfortable talking about sexual violence, if you aren't comfortable talking about sex, work that out. Assess your own biases, assess whether or not, if you're addressing these topics, the perspective that you bring, and whether or not you can come and talk with humility, acknowledging that your perspective is your own and you're talking to people who have their own perspectives. Come ready to listen and come ready to say, I don't know. Yeah, I think just that to me is the first step, being mindful of what you bring to the conversation.
Great, thank you, Anitra. Who wants to go next?
I can go next, and our first thing I'll say is I agree with Anitra that, yeah, check yourself first. So know what you bring, know your limitations, know where you still need educating on your own, for sure. I'm sorry, I was going somewhere with that. I just read the comment in the chat room, and now I got a little mixed up with what I was saying. I'm sorry, Dr. Tony, ask your question again. I'm sorry, that's something I wanted to say.
About ensuring inclusivity.
Okay, so yeah, I agree for checking yourself. I also just we had a staff person last year who was updating our middle school curriculum, and I'm kind of old school, even though I'm very modern. I'm still like, and I didn't want to say it was me, of course not me. I'm like, well, I don't know if the school is going to let us say that in the classroom. Then I said, wait a minute. Leave that in the curriculum, because I would rather risk us not getting kicked out the classroom again than to not bring that information. So I agree that we have to do, that's me checking me, check ourselves and know what we know and know what we don't know. And then making sure we put it in our curriculum. The comment I made earlier, regardless of what you have on paper, it is your facilitator, your educator, who really brings the information, so and I have respect for many of them. So whichever curriculum you purchase, if there's something in that curriculum that's not inclusive enough, you add it, do a role play, do a create a list. We a nonprofit, we love lists, create a list and have the students create a list, divide them in a small group and have them make lists and see what words that they come back with, but do some activities, I think, around inclusivity, and allow the students to lead. Student-led conversations are excellent. So, whether they're third graders or 13-year-olds, student-led or at college levels, have student-led conversations, and not always we're like, well, here we are, the experts with all the answers. Let's hear from them and then know how to work with it. So that's my comments about inclusivity. And I'll say this too. Last year, one of our schools, I'm only saying ethnicity or race at this point to make sense, but we had a white female staff go into a school that's predominantly African American. I mean, it's really like predominantly 90-some% African American, maybe 99.9. And the students at that school said, can we have somebody who look more like us come in and teach us? So we didn't want to take that as an insult. It's like, yep, we have somebody on staff who we will send in the next time. It's not like all of a sudden we want our feelings to be hurt and say, well, no, whoever we send here is who has to teach this. I go in and do a program where they say, Miss Rod, it's not the same now as it was when you were growing up. I'm like, you're right, it's not. But let's talk about some of the things that still are still around disrespect. Some of the thoughts about girls can and girls cannot, boys should and boys should not. Let's still talk about some of that philosophy. It's still the same, man. I'm not that far removed to tell you some of that is still the same, but know our limitations and our strengths. So that's the way of being inclusive.
Yeah, you know, I taught in a school like that. And so I didn't look like most of the kids there. And they were all like, you're going to be gone in a month or two. And I was like, joke's on you. I hate looking for jobs. I'm like, I am staying here. And it took me a long time to not react to the negativity that they put on me, and to really understand that it was coming from a place of what they're used to seeing at home, and understanding I need to develop this relationship with these kids who I have respect for, because they have experienced things that I never experienced in my life. And I explained to them, you know, I respect you for that. I want to make this a safe place for you. And I was able to develop some positive relationships with some of those kids, which I loved. I hated leaving that job just because of the kids. It was everything else that was no good. But for inclusivity, you know, one of the first lessons I give is about perception, and how we all have different experiences and our brains perceive different things in different ways. And we never know how our neighbor is going to perceive something. I show a picture of that dress. Remember, what color is that dress online? And it's amazing the discussion that we end up having about this dress. Half the kids see one thing, half the kids see the other. And they're like, how can you not see what I see? And I'm like, this happens with everyone. Every single one of us are unique and exactly who we need to be. And so we need to respect that. And so I spend more time discussing respect and perception, and especially self-respect. And Lizzo is always a great example to bring up for self-respect. She's just a powerhouse of it. And I love talking about her. The kids love talking about her, and they're like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. So, you know, I try to just develop these positive relationships and have them understand that we all perceive things differently.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I think is really critical is that we have to start to normalize that that relationships come in a wide variety of ways. And if we don't ever talk about that and share, and you know, we do a lot of scenario-based work as kids get older, especially around consent and bystander. If we're always sort of you know, male female oriented conversations, and we don't specifically say that, you know, I think we do a disservice to a large variety of people, a large amount of people who are in the audience. So we have to be really intentional on how we do it. And also, you know, just not assume and fall into stereotypes. We have to be like really responsible as well. So I think that's really critical as we move forward in inclusivity and thinking about it. One of the things I don't think we talk often either about is really our population who are, you know, are sort of a disability population, and how we have to make sure that we, you know, these conversations have to happen still. Much like people are always surprised older people are having sex. It's true. Don't get shocked. But like, I think, you know, and people are often surprised that that children with disabilities are also engaging in relationships and want to learn and want to know. So we can't like forego that experience, and we can't, you know, we can't keep people from the reality of it. So, you know, and I think that's a barrier too. We often, I think, want to infantile, you know, a whole population, and the reality is we shouldn't. So just being really aware and really responsible and doing your work is really important, or you come off, you know, inappropriate. And I want to double down really on what Rhonda said about the facilitator's role. And we do a program that is it's an international evidence-based program that was evaluated through Future Without Violence and Dr. Liz Miller out of Children's Hospital, called Coaching Boys and Men. And that program can be really great and really bad. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, and you know, in Pittsburgh and the surrounding cities, you know, we are really happily funded through the FICE Foundation and United Way to really run this. But it really, what the program does is it teaches coaches to have conversations, but with their athletes, really about respect and being bystander in relationships. And it's been shown to really have positive experiences. But the reality is, it is, it really heteronormative, and it's really, there's there's problems there if coaches aren't really skillful and having conversations around that. So a lot of our educators really spend time to make sure that coaches know some things they can and can't do and should do instead. And, so I really think that relationship is critical. And like knowing that just because the curriculum's out there and it's successful doesn't mean it's successful for everybody. And you have to be really thoughtful about that as well. So, yeah. Good.
Thank you so much. I'm going to step in at this point. Erin, unfortunately, is having some technical difficulties with her connection. So me and KJ will help wrap things up. But before we finish up, one other question that we have is one around how we might handle disclosures, right? So if you're an educator, if you're having these conversations, if you're building relationships with students, then it is possible that you might have disclosures of sexual or gender-based violence. And so what are the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to correctly handling disclosures? And why don't we start with Rhonda?
Thank you, Justin. The first thing, there's two first things. They're both one, number one, not one and two. Assuring the person of confidentiality, as well as showing the person of safety. You want to address, are they safe now? Do they have somewhere safe to go? And talking mostly about physical safety at that point, you will move into talking about emotional safety. And then the other number two is being honest. There's some things we have to report. There's some things we are mandated reporters that we have to report. So let the person know in advance if there's certain information they share with us that we do have to report, and assure them that is for their safety, not to get anyone in trouble. But there's certain things that we cannot keep private. So I would say those are our number one and two. Although it's three things, but making sure we address confidentiality and safety is really important. I let students know I do not need to go back and tell your teachers anything unless it involves something I'm mandated to report. Other than that, your confidentiality is number one with me. So I'll begin with saying that.
Yeah, Will.
I think one of the things that as teachers, it's really critical is, and I remember, let's face it, it's a hard job. Being an educator is a hard job. You're constantly juggling many things, and your role really is often to work through your lesson, sort of do your stuff, make sure the students are prepared. One of the things I think that often happens because of that is when students come up and they say something, because I think it's important to know, especially disclosure with youth isn't just like I was sexually assaulted or I'm in a relationship that is abusive. It's not that. They have this sort of ebb and flow where they test the waters to see if you're a safe person. And really, we have to be careful about two things, I think. One is normalization, as of like, oh, that just happens here. And the other one is victim blaming language that even doesn't sound victim blaming. Something as simple as, well, why were you in the hall with them in the first place? Or why did you let them touch you? Or, can really show a student that you're not safe, that really in the end is going to be my fault instead of their fault. So really having a victim-centered approach is really critical. Lead with belief, and really watch how you use language around victim blaming aspects of it, because it happens so fast and so quick. You don't even recognize you're doing it. You're just trying to figure it out. And in the process, what you do is you just tell that student that you're not safe and that we're calling this your fault as well. And we're moving towards some sort of status quo, right? The status quo that like everybody has to be at fault here. Therefore, we don't have to work as hard. And that's not always true. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Brett, would you like to hop in here?
Sure. I haven't really had anyone disclose to me yet in my role as a prevention educator, but as a teacher, at the charter school, students would say things, and I say, you know, you're telling me this, and I'm going to have to report this because of what you said to me. And so, just being open with them and having them understand. Now I understand that from the beginning. I say, you know, if you need to talk to somebody who you don't see every day in your community. Your school counselors are great, your teachers are great, your administration is great, but if you're sharing really private details, you might not want to share it with someone you see every day. And so I help them understand to find time when they're alone to approach somebody that they trust, and also to understand that as a mandated reporter, if they say that they are being abused physically or sexually, that we do have to report that, and that's to protect people. And also the confidentiality, of course, is a big one. I struggle with seeing kids who are really interested in the conversations we're having, who are listening and not really speaking up and sort of sitting back, and you see them sitting there and you're like, okay, something's going on. You think something's going on with this kid's life. Something's happening. Can you approach them in any way, or how do you make them feel comfortable to speak up and say something, or maybe just being there and telling them that they are valuable as they are is enough for them that day. So that's something that I struggle with, is seeing kids who you think something might be going on. You don't know really how to approach it. I took that on a little tangent, sorry.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Anitra, I don't know if you'd like to hop into this part of the conversation.
I kind of want to piggyback on what Will was talking about with being careful of victim blaming, and really taking the time, if you're in that situation, to like sit and respond. You may need time, they may need time. I tested someone recently who shared that things were moving quickly. He was at Club Pittsburgh, which, if you don't know, is a club where sex is a regular occurrence. It's like what's expected to happen when you're there. And someone had sex with him without using a condom. He said that he wanted to use when he started to say so, and before he knew it, the things were happening, and he was very uncomfortable with the situation. And whenever I shared this with my team to discuss how we handled these things, one person immediately said well, be careful who you keep around you. And I was like, I understand where you're coming from with that, but that is victim blaming. You're calling him out for being around people who he didn't trust or whatever. So I, in that moment, acknowledged that, what he experienced, wasn't right. His feelings were bad, but it validated and affirmed his experience. But I asked him, what do you need to feel safe? And what he said to me was that he probably wouldn't go to that space again because it felt unsafe. And he explained how else he would navigate. So instead of me telling him what to do, asking him what he would need to feel safe. And that way I'm not putting any judgment on it, even if I'm in that situation, wanting to protect him and be don't go there because you have to be wary of what people are going to do. That very much puts the wrong that happened on him, and that's not what we want to encourage. So just being mindful if somebody does disclose to take the time that you may both need in that space to respond very consciously and carefully.
Thank you so much. We have unfortunately gotten to the end of our time together, so I'm going to pass the mic over to KJ to close out our time here. But I want to say on behalf of the Atkins Center, and I don't think I'm speaking out of place to say on behalf of Project Safe, really appreciate all of you for joining us, and thank you so much to all four of our guests today. This has been wonderful. So KJ, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. Again, thank you all so much for attending. And thank you to our panelists for coming and speaking. We do really, really appreciate all of your prevention education efforts, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to hear all of you speak about your education and your advocacy. Thank you to Project Safe and the Atkins Center to provide the platform for the education and advocacy. Please look for a follow-up email with a survey link. It'll take about 4 minutes to complete, and it'll really help us to inform how we can continue to do programming just like this and create just like programming for the future. And you can connect with us on Instagram at Carlo Safe and at Atkins Center. And yeah, other than that, that's all for me. So again, thank you all so much for attending. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much, and thanks so much to these wonderful panelists. Please, let's continue this conversation at Carlo, and let's continue this conversation among educators. Have a great day, everyone.